There's a couple, okay. Well, Rajesh, you're working them hard. They know you're here. They don't want to look like you're slacking. So now, is everybody else sort of working on their own studio, startup studio, or are you coming primarily? Is that pretty much everyone, or maybe still some students? A bunch of students, okay. And I guess there's maybe a few others that are working for some of the other large. Anyone from Zynga here? Is it Zynga back there? Canada, more broadly, has really been very large studios. And oftentimes it's been studios like Ubisoft and EA and BioWare, and these very large companies working on very large productions. Ubisoft, the latest game, Watch Dogs, right? Watch Dogs is pretty awesome. The team in Montreal working on Watch Dogs is 700 people. And then they have a few other remote teams working around. You like Watch Dogs? Of those very large productions, and we're starting to see a lot more activity on the small games, like mobile games, social games, online games, tablet games, etc. And so in Canada, we're starting to see that shift. While we still have Ubisoft making Watch Dogs with 700 people, we have more and more startups, more and more developers that are independent. So although you don't see the picture here, that's the idea that, again, of the 24, but 20 of them didn't even exist the year prior. So it's a very encouraging context for entrepreneurship. If you look more broadly, that's supposed to be a map of Canada, the three major hubs is British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec. So I'm from Quebec, that's where most of the French Canadians are in Montreal. So there's really developing going on all across Canada. And just as an FYI, it's the third largest on the production side of the world. So the U.S. being first, Japan being second, and then Canada being third. Although sales-wise, Canada, although the land mass is huge, population is just over 30 million. So it's kind of Bombay across the whole massive amount of land there. So high degree of production, and the shift is going on. So I thought. So a couple things I want to cover. One is this idea of community building, and I think it's amazing. This is the first chapter of NASSCOM Gaming Forum. I think it's wonderful. So just a couple of words on the value of community, and then I also want to go into some kind of key lessons on the business side of things, as all of you students and indie developers embark on doing your own thing. From a community point of view, there's really kind of three stakeholders that are critical to the success of a community. The first one, being the industry itself, the business side of things. The other one being government engagement, and then academia. And these three stakeholders, we want them to be working towards the creation of IP, so game content, original IP, and talent. And they all have to be communicating and working sort of together, collaborating together with this focus on IP generation and talent development. And in countries where that's occurring, right, where there's communication and activity going between all three of these stakeholders, that's really where we see the industries and communities growing, accelerating, really happening at a faster pace than if one of or two of the partners were not there. So, for example, industry would be providing internships to academia. Academia might be doing advanced AI research and providing that to industry that then is funding academia. Academia is doing research that's relevant to government and the economics of games. Governments providing tax incentives or funding schemes to industry. Industries paying taxes to government. Et cetera, et cetera. This kind of a virtuous cycle between all three stakeholders. And so things like the NASSCOM Gaming Forum or IGP or other events will come together are critical, but also it's engaging with government, engaging with academia, and collaborating. So it's definitely encouraging to see a lot of things that are happening in India, although I think that the government piece is probably slightly lacking in terms of, if you look at Canada, for example, where the Canadian government, the provincial governments are quite aggressive in terms of tax breaks and funding schemes and helping entrepreneurs, do business abroad, et cetera, et cetera. So that might be a very important one. And then the idea, again, that it's about IP and talent. I think in India, certainly I'm seeing this shift or struggle and shift between services and work for hire, which really has been the bread and butter of the Indian game sector, towards IP development, towards product development, and sort of the struggle between, delivering on time and on budget to be creative and creating something, part out of nothing. So just in terms of the ecosystem, this is the kind of activity and relationships we want to see happening. The next one is this idea that I kind of view games through three different lenses or three different filters. One of those filters is the technology. I mean, we're all game people here, so we often think about games and code and chips and consoles and devices, and we're thinking of the technology and how technology drives the industry, and it's fairly obvious. The other one is, the other filter is design. Design, but I don't mean just sort of gameplay design, but also the design of culture, right? I mean, ultimately what we're doing is building cultural artifacts, we're part of pop culture. And so the aesthetic, design, cultural elements of games and what they mean. I think in India, games don't necessarily have a lot of respect as a cultural medium, as an art form. And we're only just sort of approaching that in some of the Western markets where it's considered, legit, that games really matter, they mean something, they affect us as human beings. And maybe sort of Japan, which is also a very playful culture. But so this is an important one: design, aesthetics, culture. That we often, we might think of the game, gameplay design, but not necessarily about the larger impact and place games have in our society and culture. And then, of course, the third sort of lens is the business lens, and looking at the economics of games, the money side, how games make money, how companies are funded, the value chain, distribution, marketing, all that kind of business and legal framework. Which I'm guessing the vast majority of people in this room never even worry about, or don't even think about, maybe other than their jobs. I think of companies, or even when I talk to people, as to what degree are they sort of seeing the game world through these three lenses all at the same time. If you're looking at or talking to a game programmer, they probably spend most of their time seeing the world through just the tech lens. Conversely, if you're talking to a game designer, they're thinking about the cultural and sort of design aspect and not really worrying about technology or business. And then also if you're talking to a business manager, or they're just thinking about the money and probably not really putting much weight on technical innovation or design aesthetics of what they're doing. The reality is that as the market shifts to mobile, as the demographics grow to the extent that everybody is a gamer, and as it sort of shifts to the point where you're going direct to the consumer, whether you're a programmer, an artist, a designer, you need to be thinking about all of these elements, right? When you think about mobile, the difference between design and business is so integrated when you're thinking of a free-to-play game. You cannot design the game without thinking about the monetization of the game, just as one example. So, I mean, certainly for the students, even if you're specializing in a computer science degree or an animation degree, you can't sort of ignore the other filters or the other lenses. So this is true on an individual basis. It's true at a project level. It's true at a company level. But it's also true at a sort of an industry level or region level. So to what extent does India, as a game community, think about games from the technological, design, and cultural, and business aspects? If everybody in the country is just thinking about technology, there's all engineers, that's not enough to really kind of grow and build a vibrant community, a vibrant ecosystem. The same thing, if it was all just a bunch of bankers thinking about how great a game, how great the business is and how much money is being made, and they're not factoring in design or technology, what are a bunch of bankers going to make? They're not going to make anything fun or compelling. So you really have to think of this in an integrated manner. All right. So there's a very famous book I assume this book is probably available in India. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is a very famous book, I think, published in like 200 countries and sold tens of millions of copies. It has absolutely nothing to do with the game industry. It was written probably like 20 years ago. But it's a catchy title. And so often when we think about execution labs, is what are those habits that enable successful or enable developers to succeed? Or we look at successful developers, what habits can we view from their behavior? So I thought I would give you kind of my 7 habits that I observe from successful developers, and I'm speaking specifically from the business side of you. So how do you succeed sort of in this business as new developers? So that's what we're gonna do. All right. Does anyone know who this is? Well, the projector is horrible. Does anyone know? I don't imagine you would know, but do you know who it is? Who is it? Where is he from? English. He looks English, doesn't he? I think his name is actually there, but the quality of the image is there. So his name is Daniel James. He is British, although he's been living in San Francisco for quite some time. He's the studio director of a studio called 3 Rings Design, which more recently was bought by Sega. But so the first habit is, I call it kind of wear the suit. In that someone has to play the role of the businessman or the business person. Someone has to wear the suit now. Daniel always looks dapper, and he goes overboard, and then he wears these kind of really 100-year-old sort of funky style suits to kind of overemphasize it. But meaning, even if you're on a team of purely creatives, a designer, a programmer, an artist, a producer, a sound designer, someone on that team needs to wear the suit. Someone has to assume the responsibility of how are we going to build a company, how are we going to fund this, how are we going to make money. And even though you may not have that as your training or background, if nobody takes on that role, if nobody wears the suit, you're in trouble, right? You're just going to ride yourself into the ground. And I don't mean you literally have to wear the suit, but you have to put your hand up and say, you know what, I'll take on these responsibilities. Now, on a small 4-person team, chances are you still have to do your production work. Right? You can't just sit around with a suit on and smoke cigars. You got to do production work because the team is tiny. But someone has to assume that role. So, in terms of a habit of successful indies, we generally see that someone on the team is taking that responsibility or wearing the suit. Does anyone know who this guy is? Again, the quality images are really... Who? Rami Schnab from Belangear in the Netherlands. Very famous indie developer. Rami is a super hardcore programmer, engineer, computer science, whatever background, mega coder. And he also has good design sensibility and so on. But this guy never shuts up. He's always talking about his game. He's always talking about what he's doing. He's always evangelizing his projects. He's always promoting and telling his story, telling the stories of others. So when I say he never shuts up, I say it in a good way because you like to hear what he has to say. But he's always selling. Now he's not trying to sell you. Here's my used car. Another used car salesman. I don't know what the equivalent is in India, right, where someone's always trying to sell you stuff and you're like, well, I don't want it. And he doesn't sell it in a way that makes him seem like a salesman, but he's always telling his story. He's always talking about his vision, what he's working on, and people just, they want to follow him. They want to believe in what he's doing. They like to hear what he's working on. And this is an important element. I find a lot of developers are shy. Right? They're kind of embarrassed. They don't want to share what they're working on, or they don't want to bother people. And so, when I say you should always be selling, it's less about selling. It's more about sharing your story, sharing your vision, talking about what you're doing. And it's super valuable, not only just so that people are aware of what you're working on, but also as a mechanism to get feedback. Right? So I'm always telling people what I'm working on. It's a means to collect input and criticism to hopefully improve what I'm working on. And then you never know, you tell someone, And they're like, oh, you should totally talk to my friend who's working on something, that may be relevant, and then they make an introduction, and then, who knows where that goes. But if you're not talking about what you're working on, you're not sharing your ideas, if you're not sort of always out there selling, those opportunities won't present themselves. So again, I don't mean selling from a, kind of a cheesy car salesman point of view, but selling in terms of sharing your story, sharing your vision, talking about what you're doing. And the best indies do that, and you don't even realize they're doing it. Right? So Rami, super strong reputation, everybody loves this guy, everybody knows this guy, but the guy is always talking, always selling, you always know what he's working on, and you buy into that vision. He helps you, you want to help him, so just get out there, talk, and share.
He's actually one of my close ones.
Game Tantra? All right, great. So in fact, last week Rami was in Montreal doing some mentorship with our teams at Execution Labs, and it was wonderful. So yeah, Rami is fantastic. All right, so I did a search for Notch and money. Dudes, if you guys know who this is, what did he do? What? Minecraft. Come on. So Notch is from Sweden, and I didn't draw this, so I was looking for Google images, and I thought this was funny. So yeah, he and his team at Minecraft has made millions and millions and millions of dollars. Now, I don't know about India, but certainly in the West, there is some sense that making money is kind of like inappropriate. Right? Well, if we're artists and if we're pure and we want to create meaningful games, well then I shouldn't be worried about success or making money. Whereas you do have successes like Minecraft, where no one sort of doubts his reputation. No one thinks he's like a money-hungry, demon or whatever. He's still well respected. He's still doing innovative work. Still driving the industry forward. And yeah, he's also happens to be making a ton of money. And so, amazingly enough, even at Execution Labs, even though the context is they're starting a project to make money, there's almost this things that are necessary to make the game and make money. And so obviously enough, the indie developers that have succeeded have kind of been okay to make money. Not as their sole driver, of course. I think they all still, like Notch, they want to make great games, they want to deliver value to their players, but they accept that in order to do it well, to continue doing it, they need to generate revenue. So that's something in many ways it's counterintuitive, given that you think if you're going in business, you're going to be okay to make money, but you'd be surprised how many people they kind of hesitate on this one. All right. Sorry, wrong direction. Okay. Anyone know who this is? The guy, not the girl. No? All right, that's Eric Zimmerman. Does that name sound familiar? Eric Zimmerman? So Eric Zimmerman literally wrote the book on game design. He wrote a book called Rules of Play with Katie Salem, which is to this day still one of the best books on gaming design. That's his wife, Natalie, who's actually an architect, and they collaborate on game products, but by training she's an architect. So Eric lives in New York. He's a very well-known, very famous designer. He was making indie games before we even called them indie games. He was an indie developer before we even had that as a name. So he's been in the industry a long time. And has had much success, both creatively, critically, and commercially. Now, the reason why I put it here, the habit that I see from Eric is this idea of being what I call well-cultured. Meaning, even though he's super nerd when it comes to game design, and really one of the best game designers on the planet, he has 1,000 other interests. Whether it's architecture, or history, or cuisine, or music, art, whatever. I can't even keep up with all of his interests. And he learns something from all these other areas, all these other cultures, all these other disciplines, and he merges that with his design discipline. And that sort of ensures that his designs, his creations are fresh are inspired, are different than the designs that are done by the 3 guys who play Call of Duty, 24 hours a day, and they're just going to make another shooter. Whatever, it's a fine game. The amount of creativity is limited if all you ever consume is games. Games, and you sort of just keep consuming games, and so that's all you have in order to base your next creation on. I could have also put a picture of Miyamoto. So Miyamoto, of course, is the creator of Zelda and Mario and Pikmin and all the other amazing Nintendo games. Often when he lectures, he talks about his sources of inspiration. Right? So Pikmin came from when he was a kid playing in the gardens. Zelda, I think, was him saying when he used to go play in the forest, and so the labyrinths behind the forest behind his house that inspired him to do Zelda. I could be wrong on that, but in Mario, I forget what. I think Mario was inspired by the guy selling pizza, down the street from his house or something. I forget. But the point being, the sources of inspiration, the ideas are coming from different places than just games. And I think to a certain extent, and I don't know how it is in India, but certainly in the West, you get this thing where we're so in love with games, we're so passionate about games, that our source of inspiration is so